Hi, I'm Sal from Our Next Make, and today we're in pursuit of the perfect miter. Whether you're installing molding, making a picture frame, or building a box, you're likely going to have to cut miters. The good news is there's a lot of ways to cut them, and they're fairly easy to make, but getting great results can take a bit of work. In this video, I'll show you how to get great results using a variety of tools while we pursue the perfect miter. Let's start by looking at the miter saw, a tool that was designed to make cutting miters really easy. You just turn the saw to the desired angle and make the cut. No matter what the angle, two pieces will come together and meet up perfectly. The trick here is getting the resulting angle to be what we need, most often 90 degrees. To accomplish this, we need to cut perfect 45s. Your saw should have been set to cut accurate 45s at the factory, but you may find that it needs a little bit of adjustment once you get it to your shop. Every saw is a bit different, so check your instruction manual for how to adjust your saw's angles. On my saw, I just loosen a few screws and then can adjust the angle gauge. After each adjustment, make a few test cuts and check for 90. Even better, cut 4 sets of pieces and check to see if they come together to form a perfect box. Once the tool is dialed in, you should be able to repeatedly cut great miters. If, however, you find that you need to further dial in the angle, you can creep up on it by adding a layer or two of tape to the fence. This will ever so slightly change the angle of the wood relative to the blade and help open or close a gap. You can cut miters here at the table saw too. Your saw will have come with a miter gauge like this, and although it may be far from perfect, you can still get good results with a little bit of tuning. This miter gauge allows you to set 3 positive stops, 1 for 90 degrees and 2 for 45 degrees on either side of 90. These adjustment screws make it really easy to fine-tune. As we did with the miter saw, we'll make test cuts after each adjustment and creep up on the perfect angle. A simple gauge like this can work well, but you do have to hold the work securely while you make the cut. Because we're cutting at an angle, the spinning blade will try to tug the workpiece towards it. This could slightly alter the angle or the overall length of the part. So either clamp the piece to the miter gauge or consider another method. I found that you can get better results with this method compared to a well-tuned miter saw. But to get even better results, you may want to consider making a dedicated miter sled. I've left a link to a video from David Picciuto where he shows how to build a great miter sled that produces perfect results every time. So far, we've only seen ways to cut miters that are appropriate for frames or molding. But what if we want to miter the corners of a box, and the height of the box exceeds the miter saw's capacity? Of course, you could tilt the miter saw to cut a 45-degree bevel, but this is where I prefer the table saw. If the piece is narrower than it is long, I'll use my miter gauge set to 90 degrees to make the cut. If I need to bevel a long edge, I'll run the workpiece along the rip fence. The key to either of these methods is to dial in the perfect 45-degree angle. Without any special tools, it's a matter of making cuts and testing the fit until you have it dialed in. Once you find the perfect 45, you should be able to set a positive stop on your saw to easily return to it every time. A digital angle finder like this can help, but remember, they're typically accurate to within plus or minus 0.2 degrees. So if you rely on them, you'll still have a bit of variability. All of these methods still stand the chance to be less than perfect, but depending on what you're making, that may be just fine. If the gap will be hidden most or all of the time, it may not matter. On a box like this, I care far more about how the outside corners look, so I may not care if there's a bit of a gap on the inside. In fact, sometimes I'll intentionally cut a miter slightly off from 45 to ensure that I have a tight joint on the side that I need it most. But this video is all about the pursuit of the perfect miter, so we need to turn to the tool that requires no calibration to achieve a perfect 45-degree angle. That, of course, is the router. With a chamfering bit installed in a router, you can rely on its inherent precision to give you a perfect 45. I have yet to get around to building my full-size router table, but I should be able to still get perfect miters with my small palm router table. Because I'm trying to fully chamfer this face, I can't rely on the bearing to guide the material. I'll need to install a fence. I can do this precisely by first using the router to chamfer a short section along the middle of a straight piece of wood. With this clamped in place, I can drill a hole in another straight piece of wood and make a plunge cut until this piece sits flush against the first one. Once clamped in place, it'll act as a fence for my table. The fence works well for long pieces, but cutting short pieces can be dangerous because they lack the bearing surface to remain stable. A full-size router table will have a miter gauge for this very task, but you can also create a jig for this, and it can be as simple as clamping or even taping your workpiece to a longer backer board before passing it through the router. I really had high hopes for this approach because it creates a really crisp surface, but you can see when those are close together, you can probably, without the square, see that it's totally off. I can't wait to get to the bottom of why those angles were so far off. It's possible that the tolerances on the chamfering bit are just not high enough, or that my setup isn't accurate. But for now, I can't wait to see if using a higher quality bit in my CNC router gets me the results that I'm after. This is the box that I'm working on for an upcoming project. The corners are simple miters, but I want them to be absolutely perfect. So I'll lay out all 4 sides in a continuous grain orientation and see if I can cut the miters using a 90-degree V-bit on the CNC. The trick here is to cut almost all the way through, but leave a tiny bit of wood in place so the grain truly wraps around the corner. My first thought was to leave a 32nd of an inch, or 0.8 millimeters, of wood in the corner and machine away the rest. This looks like it'll produce a flat bottom that'll end up being an issue, but we'll cut it anyway to see how things go. To eliminate the flat, I'll squeeze the width of the miter ever so slightly so we end up with a perfect point at the bottom, but still leave a bit of wood to bend around the corner. Looking at these tool paths, I can't help but think that there's a lot of excessive movement going on. Because this bit is so small, it has to move around and slowly work its way down to create a cut so wide. If I had a larger bit, I could do it in a single pass, but I'll need to order one. For now, I've got an idea for how I can make better use of this small bit. If I were to do a series of straight cuts with this small bit, it would produce this geometry. And if I stopped here, the corner wouldn't be able to close. But if I also remove this rectangular piece, it would make room for the shoulder and create a really cool joint. Let's give this a try too. I'll use this scrap piece of cherry to test out the joints. These came out really great, but seeing the V-groove with the flat bottom in real life makes me really skeptical that we're going to get a good joint out of it. These other two though, get me really excited. The V-groove with the pointed bottom is hanging on by just a few fibers, so I think it's going to fold up really great. And I'm super excited to see how this one with the shoulder turns out. But before I bend any of them, I'm going to wet the wood and hit it with a little bit of heat to relax the fibers. So we learned a couple things. I think the first is that if you use a higher quality router bit, you stand a much better chance of getting a perfect 45-degree angle. The other thing is that we have a clear winner, a clear loser, and one that still has potential. I'm really excited about continuing to fine-tune this miter joint with the shoulder, but when my larger bit arrives, I think I'm going to focus on creating this pointed V-groove, because when it folds up, it gives me a perfect 90-degree angle, and I get this amazing continuous grain. This pursuit of a perfect miter was really fun, and I'm glad I had the chance to experiment with a bunch of different ways to try and create one. I hope that you learned a few things that'll help you on your woodworking journey. Just remember, whether you use hand tools or power tools, and whether you cut perfect miters all the time, or you're still honing your skills, woodworking is as much about the journey as it is about the end results. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you on our next make.